digital transformation of learning. This session is going to have 3 speakers. I would like to give very special thanks to the European Training Foundation who organized this space. And again, this is going to be a session involving 3 main speakers. One is going to be Filippo Del Nino from ETF right away. Then we're going to have Luis de la Torre, the CEO and founder of Nebulous Systems. And lastly, we're going to have a specific presentation from Chris Richmond, the founder of Migrants. So without indulging any further, let me just move on with the slides. And first of all, before even getting to the presentations, we would like to have your special contributions to make this session as interactive as possible, as we understand that this is siesta time. So let's not sleep altogether. Let's keep this dynamic and engaging. So please, everybody, try to access this platform, Slido, with the access code ETFDTL. Alternatively, you have a QR code here on your screen. So please, if you want, you can scan this, and let's go to start with this poll. So let's see what is going to be. To what extent will the introduction and expansion of digital online learning and digitization of education continue after the end of pandemic? So this is a live poll. So whatever you type in your answers to these polls will appear on our screen now. So we can comment quickly your answers. For now, it will continue and will affect all levels of education is leading. Thank you for sending your responses. I can see that now the 82% of you is answered that it will continue and will affect all levels of education. I see already that some other people are responding, it will continue at a regular pace, but it will be limited to specific contexts and not at a systemic level. And also, let's say a handful of people are answering it will stop or continue slowly in specific contexts. This is just a little bit to contextualize with the topic and to see your experience and your comments on the topic that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. Again, we're receiving a few more comments, a few more answers. Contribute to the poll. Let's see what you all reply. Again, 75% of you are typing that it will continue and it will affect all levels of education. So let's see if that's the case. And I'm just going to give the floor to Filippo Del Nino. Filippo Del Nino is from the European Training Foundation. Again, thank you very much to the European Training Foundation for the organization of this session. We're going to be together for 1 hour and a half, so until 3:30. So Filippo, if you're connected, I will give the floor to you.
Thank you very much.
We lost you for a little bit, Filippo. Okay, now you're back. You lost connection for just a while. Thank you.
Okay, so the idea behind this presentation is because we have faced over the last few years a change in our support for our partner countries and how we are supporting them in developing digitalization in education and digital teaching and learning. So we had 3 phases which are heavily been impacted by COVID. Of course, before COVID, we were mainly working at piloting new pedagogies and digital approaches in a few schools, usually center of excellence or in specific schools which were identified as more available from the ministry to actually participate in this type of pilots. And we had relatively big funds compared to the number of schools involved, the number of teachers involved. And then we had the pandemic crisis, so all countries had to deal in no time, 2-3 weeks, with the systemic introduction of distance education to actually avoid students losing years of education, with basically little resources because no funds were originally allocated. And of course, you had to deal with the whole amount of students at all educational levels. In this phase, what we have done is try to support them by monitoring the situation, organizing webinars where we shared the best practices and the experiences, and we let countries discuss on how they were dealing with the situation. And now we're in a different phase. We are still in the crisis, unfortunately, so we're still dealing with the complexity of COVID, but many countries, what they're trying to do now is to introduce a system change. They actually discovered that they coped with this challenge better than they expected. I have to say schools at all levels and the ministry have been quite successful in introducing different systems in a very little time. So they now have a much better understanding of what it entails to set up these new systems. They have new tools. Sometimes at central level, you may have some central platforms for e-learning. Sometimes at school levels, many centers of excellence have piloted Moodle platforms or something else. But they still have little resources because when you deal with all schools at all levels, the number of resources that you have for the different schools is quite limited. So what we received in terms of requests from many countries is how do I actually set up a new system? How do I make a new strategy for introducing of digitalization in education? And that's where we started investigating what are all the key pillars that you have to take in consideration where you develop these new strategies. Next slide. So of course, you can cluster these differently according to how you prefer, but these are more or less all the elements. You have the policy framework, the hardware and software, the pedagogy, the digital content to be developed, the students' digital competences, the teachers' digital competences. Then you have an important element, which is equity and social inclusion. Then you have the quality assurance of the whole framework. So we'll go quickly through all of these. So starting from policy framework, next slide. Okay, so in terms of policy framework, the most important thing is to start understanding the scope that countries want to engage. Ideally, and digitalization addresses the whole educational system. So you would like to start with a lifelong learning strategy where you can create a lot of complementarity between the different levels. However, depending on the governance of the country, you may have countries where these get too complicated, where you don't move because you have to manage too many stakeholders, too many ministries, too many sub-directorates. So this is really something that the countries have to decide for themselves. Ideally, the lifelong learning environment is the best one for digitalization, but this has to be really customized by each country. Then for governance, you also have the public-private partnership that you can develop with private actors. We had a lot of cooperation with telecoms during the COVID crisis for many countries. So you may think of involving private sectors representing digital companies in the governance of the new policy framework. In terms of objective, it's very important to be focused from the beginning. It's quite complicated to address the whole system from scratch. So you may want to define what is your priority. You may use digital online learning for increasing effectiveness of education. So you may have less schools dealing with specialization of schools because students can actually attend schools through online learning and then having only part of the classes in school. So you may have specialization. You may have students who actually attend schools which are not available in the area. So you have a lot of opportunities in terms of creating efficiency and effectiveness in the sector. Or you may just use it at national level to improve the quality of education by developing digital material, interactive lessons that are introduced at all levels in the classes. Or you may also develop an objective of addressing social inclusion by targeting population which have problems in accessing education, in accessing school, especially in very big countries. So according to what is your priority, then you have to really focus your strategy, especially in the short term, short and medium term. While you can have a long-term objective of actually targeting all levels, in the beginning, focusing is very important. And then you have the financing element, which is quite important because you need to understand what is the cost of what are your objectives. Because you have to plan resources, because if you don't have the resources, then all your plans are simply not being able to be put in place, especially in an area like digitalization, which has some entry courses which are based on the hardware. Talking about hardware, next slide. The first very important element is to assess which are the minimum standards that are required by all actors. According to what are your objectives and what you want to do, you need to assess what schools need to have, what teachers need to have in schools and at home, what students and families, also in companies, talking about work-based learning, and also talking about other potential stakeholders. And this has to be a very regular assessment because the requirements when you talk about digitalization change very rapidly. So you may also decide that you put some standards in the beginning which are minimum because you know that that's what the families can allow. And then you adapt your pedagogies to the standards that you have. So you cannot be too ambitious if you don't need to provide students with certain software, for example, especially when you talk about technical vocations. But then over time, you need to review your standards to be able to deliver education at a higher level. If you talk about 3D printers, for example, now you don't have at home. You do have 3D printers only in some schools at higher level for specific vocations, but that can change. So they can become cheaper and cheaper. And then maybe you arrive at a point where for certain vocations, it is a minimum requirement. If you enroll your child in those schools, they will say you need to have a 3D printer. It's 300, 400 euros, but you need to buy it. And if you put it as a minimum requirement, then you have to integrate policies which allow families who don't have the money to actually get one from the school or to rent one from the school. So it's very important that the standards are assessed on a regular basis from the Ministry or the Quality Assurance Institute, depending on who's the stakeholder who takes responsibility for this. It's a very important element also of social inclusion because you can't just say you need to have one computer at home because you probably have 3-4 kids and then one computer is not enough. So this is very important to be very careful. I just put an example, which is Selfie. Selfie is a tool developed by the European Commission by a number of partners like Joint Research Center in ETF, which allow a self-reflection process to integrate digital technologies in teaching, learning, student assessment. It goes beyond the issue of only hardware and software, but it's a quite good tool to start having an assessment. We are piloting it. It's already used in many EU countries. We are piloting in several countries outside Europe. In many countries now, they are setting up a strategy for implementing Selfie on a regular basis. So this is just to give you an example. So you can look on the internet. Is a quite easy tool, but it's also quite effective and useful. Next slide. Now, the pedagogy is the most important thing. So it's a condition sine qua non. You can't have any form of digital online learning with traditional front teaching from teachers. That's what we had in the beginning of the COVID reaction because there was no other alternative. You basically had Skype or Google Meet or whatever, the teacher speaking and the students listening. If you're lucky, listening, otherwise just other stuff. So if you don't have a pedagogy which let students interact and make project works and exercise over the computer, is just not working. It's just pointless to continue. Now, of course, we had to do it last year and we're doing it this year for countries because there was no other solution. But if you want to set up a new strategy and you want to be ambitious, then you can only implement online learning and distance learning with a relevant pedagogies. These are some limitations because of course you don't have physical interaction, but very many opportunities. I think the two examples we'll see will really give an idea of what you can do, and that's really, really a lot. Of course, working online in an online setting will boost student-centered pedagogies because they will have to be interactive, they will be to have initiative, they will have to work on projects. So there's a lot of strong synergies between the two pedagogies. And most important thing of all, it has to be owned by all stakeholders. So it has to be owned by the ministries who has to set it up, by the teachers who have to implement it, by the students who have to use it, and by the families. And all these stakeholders is essential. Now with families, for example, in some cases, you do not have a positive reaction. Like in Italy, you have a very conservative approach from families, a very strong and negative reactions towards distance learning. I know because my daughter is in school, lower secondary, and there's a daily guerrilla from parents against distance learning. And that's something you can't avoid. I mean, but you have to take it in consideration. There's no way you introduce it if the families oppose it. So, I mean, this ownership, and it's very important. And we have to set up a strategy. You have to involve families from the beginning to show them what are the added value. Otherwise, you have this negative reaction, especially from the beginning, because you start, it's going to be difficult at the beginning. Teachers are not going to be good in the beginning. So if you don't have the buy-in of the families, it's going to be blocked immediately. Next slide. Okay, the digital content is a problem in the sense that you need a massive amount of digital content to be developed. So it's not a problem in terms that you have companies who can do it. You do have a lot of content which is already available. The problem is that you don't have content and already for all subjects at all levels. So if you want to go, especially in digitalization of education, which means addressing all levels of education and all subjects, you need to put a lot of work. And been developed by national or international companies. A lot of it it's already available. A lot of it is available for free. So you can already look on the internet, and there are already many organizations in Europe who provide content. Then you may have specific national authorities who are charged to develop this content. But the most important and a biggest added value is that content developed by teachers. You've got hundreds and thousands of teachers in some countries per subject. And if they start developing content on their own, and if you can quality assure the content, so you say this is acceptable to be shared for all teachers, then you will not have any problem anymore. In a few years, you will have even too much content to work on. So the importance of network is very important to underline here, and the importance of teachers to start developing their own content, interactive lessons, tests, exercises, and whatever. And the same thing can be said about the content developed by students. If you work on a project base, if you work in an interactive environment, students will actually come up with their own research, their own projects, their own ideas, their own exercises, and also these can be shared once you make a quality assurance check. So there's a lot of opportunities in terms of developing digital content, but this has to be taken in consideration when you start working on a strategy. So you should start asking yourself, how do I cope? Because you may also prioritize in certain areas, because those areas or those vocations are the ones where you already have a lot of content. So you may say, in these areas, we do the teacher training for the teachers because we already have a lot of content. So I train the teachers, I have the content, I can start working through the education. In other areas, maybe I don't invest because in any case, I don't have enough material. So assessing what you have and what you can find and what you have to develop is very important also for the prioritization of your interventions. Next slide. This is the most important slide of all. I mean, this is the students' digital competences. Okay, this can be both the tool for digitalization of education, in the sense that you can apply and implement pedagogies and tools of a certain complexity only when the students have the digital competences to manage it. Okay. It's very important that you assess what are the digital competences of students, because that's necessary for you to plan what type of education you can use. But at the same time, if you frame the skills and the competence required by students in a number of levels and descriptors, you can already also define digital competency as a key competence. So something which is the outcome of your education system. This is the most important thing, because using digital competence as a key competence is very useful at all levels. So if we move to the next slides, I can show you just what the European Union has done with the digital competence framework for citizens. This is just a very general slide. You have these 5 competence areas In total, it's 21 competences. Each competence has its own levels and descriptors. It is quite complex when you see it the first time, but when you start using it, this is very useful. And this you can use also to plan what are the standards that you want students to achieve at a different level. So what are the standards that you define for students which finish primary education? You define the standards, you make sure that students do reach those levels, and then you can use these standards to plan education at lower or secondary level. So, and these standards has to evolve over time because the new generation will be much more digital native than what we have now. So every 5 years, you can actually upgrade the standards. Say, okay, I think that end of primary students should be able to reach level 2 of digital content creation, but maybe in 5 years time you can actually pretend that they reach level 3 just because of their background, which is different from what we had and what our children have now. So it's very important that you use something similar to this. This is a very good standard. It's a very good framework. It's been developed through the work of hundreds of researchers, teachers, professors, experts. So it's a very solid one. But of course, in every country, you can adapt it, customize it, simplify if you want. But having a reference framework for using digital competence as a key competence is the most effective way to actually plan reforms in digital education, implement reforms, and monitor reforms. Next slide. Okay, teachers' competence, it comes without saying. It's the main success factor and, of course, the main challenge. When we talk about teachers, I mean, talking about a huge number, I mean, a stakeholder which has a huge number of units. So in terms of addressing these, you need to probably prioritize in the beginning, and then you need to have passion, because you probably need also generational change to really have teachers which at system level can systemically implement digital education. That's why it's a good reason to prioritize. You may find areas of vocation where it's easier to start. You may find levels of education where it's easier to start. Could be at a university level, could be a primary, depending really of your assessment of the teacher's competence. The complexity of the pedagogy you want to use at the different level of education, of course, has to be adapted to the level of competence of teachers. And to be able to assess what is the level of competence of teachers, again, you need a framework. Again, you have one which has been already developed by the Commission. It's called the DG Comp.edu. Sorry, the acronym is a bit complex, but it's a framework which helps to assess what are the competences of teachers. So it has a number of areas. We can move to the next slide. I don't know if you can read because it's a bit small, but you have 6 different areas, again, with different levels, different descriptors, and this framework can be used to assess the teacher's competences. And again, it's used to have standards. So you may define what is the minimum standard that new teachers might have. You may decide for new teachers, I'm going to introduce in the pre-service teacher training this component, and they say you can only become a teacher if you reach level 3, for example, of all indicators, or level 2 to start, but you need in 10 years time to reach level 4. So you may use this framework to actually plan the competences of your new teachers. And for the existing one, of course, you can introduce this framework and these levels for the in-service teacher training. So this framework or something similar, again, each country can customize a framework according to their needs. But again, it is a very good starting place if they want to use. So countries can really use this framework to decide how to shape the reform, which area to prioritize, how much to invest, and all these factors. Next slide. This for me is the most important. Is I'm especially keen on highlighting the problem of equity and social inclusion, and all studies have demonstrated that when you've tried to implement digital online learning at system level, so for all students, it always increases inequalities in education. Digital online learning and digitalization in education have a strong potential to be used for social inclusion. So, and I think we have one of the two examples, which is a very good example for it. So you will have a lot of cases of best practices where this is used for social inclusion. But when you go at system level, it brings inequalities unless you make a very big effort to take this under control. The reasons are probably obvious. I mean, there are disadvantages in hardware, software between different students. There's an equal distribution of the key transversal competences, which are the drivers of digital online learning. So you need students who are able to take initiative, to work in group, to lead, to look for information, analyze information. If you don't have these strong transversal competences, you will not make use of the added value of digital online learning. And students who do have it will will get the benefit of it, and these inequalities between students of different social classes will be even more highlighted. Then you have, of course, the special cases of students with learning disabilities, which are more difficult to be supported online. And then you have the cases of the stronger dropout. There was an interview when introduced distance learning. There was an interview with a group of students outside school, in a typical environment where they're being more honest, with a pack of students all supporting each other. And they asked these students, what did he think about distance education? And the student, I quote, said, "Distance learning sucks because I play FIFA the whole time." Which is a contradictory statement, because the students acknowledge the fact that he doesn't hear the lessons and it actually brings a negative impact on his learning. But at the same time, he just cannot avoid to play video games during the lesson. And this example actually gives you an idea of all the aspects I've just mentioned. So you need teachers who are able to actually have interactive lessons. Do not provide frontal lessons which are boring for students. You need students who have developed competences which allow them to interact, because you need to have students who have learned already from primary that they want to take actually the central, I mean, to stand on the podium and talk and present and participate. And if you don't have that, even if the teacher is good, they will not participate. And then you have the social inclusion element. So the first students who will switch off the camera and switch off the audio are the ones which are at risk, and are the ones who actually drop out soon after. And even in countries, I was at a presentation from Estonia, which is one of the countries where they have the stronger focus on social inclusion. And they said we had a huge problem last year with dropout, because it was too easy for them just to go outside, don't even attend. And it was very difficult for us to actually recover them. And what they've decided, for example, is for students at risk, they reopen the schools. As those ones, we send them back to school, even during COVID, because we cannot have them staying at home. So this social inclusion element is really one of the priorities when you start implementing digitalization of education at system level. Then we have quality assurance. I will go quite quickly on this slide. You need to define standards for schools, for teachers, we talk about it, for students, and you need to revise the standards on a regular basis. Usually this is part of the quality assurance processes. So when you actually apply for the certificate from school to the quality assurance, that you need to respect a number of standards, and you can include a number of standards for digitalization. So you can decide that only schools which respect certain standards implement online learning, for example. So you have a number of opportunities to use quality assurance to actually improve and make sure that digitalization in education is delivered in a way that is effective and doesn't increase social exclusion. Then have a next slide. Just a few overall conclusion. This is a clearly long-term reform. and which has an exponential impact. So in the beginning, when you start implementing these reforms, you will not see massive results. But then when the new generation will start developing digital competences already from kindergarten and primary education, then the impact is going to be exponential, because you will be in a position to implement much more advanced pedagogies using much more advanced tools, give students much more autonomy, and so on and so on. So it will have a limited impact in the short term, but it's really advisable to start working on these strategies because it may have an exponential impact in the future. It requires the introduction of digital key competence. For me, it's again is a condition sine qua non. It's very, very useful for the implementation of digitalization strategies at all levels. For each aspect, if you are able to assess what are the digital competences of students, then you are in a position to plan and implement and monitor reforms properly. It naturally increases inequality in education, so this has to be managed carefully. Again, you need to assess the learning outcomes of students on a regular basis, and if you see that this inequality increases, then you have to take actions for it. I think we have a Slido.
Yes, Filippo, thank you very much for your inputs. First of all, it was a very interesting topic that we are addressing today in this session. And I see that there's a lot of movement in the chat box as well in terms of questions and comments about your presentation. I'm wondering, Filippo, if you would like to just give a few answers to those questions first, and then we go on with the poll.
Yeah, I'm looking at them.
Would you like to answer some of them? For example, Hulusi Karatash is asking, how will you monitor regularly teacher competences, for example?
I think there should, I mean, for given the number of students and teachers, you cannot externally assess every time their competences. So what you can have is a process where you set up self-assessment methodologies where the teachers have to actually assess themselves over the framework, co-assessment where you ask teachers to actually assess each other in partnership, and external assessment done or not on a regular basis, but you can actually have randomly, in the sense that you use statistical calculations to identify teachers you have to assess on a regular basis for each different area, and then you actually cross these three type of results. So you cannot only assess externally, because you will never have the resources, but you need to introduce in the school the concept of self-assessment for teachers. That's why it's very important that you define policies which are not punitive. And you cannot say, I mean, I assess teachers and those who do not reach a certain level, they don't get the increase in the salary, because this way, I mean, the whole system will collapse. If the assessment does not reflect the real competence of the teachers, then it's not going to be useful.
Okay, thank you, Filippo. I have a raised hand here, so if you would like to just answer this question that's going to be asked by Dr. Salva Kotb, I'm going to unmute you so you can pose your question, and I invite all of you to raise your hands if you have any other questions. Thank you. Dr. Salva, can you speak, please? Are you able to unmute yourself, Dr. Salva? All right, in the waiting, we can wait for her to unmute herself and to see if we can have her question. I have here in the chat box another question for you, Filippo, if you don't mind.
No, sure.
Bob Mahai is asking how to include persons living with...
Yes, you hear me?
Oh, yes.
You
now
hear me?
We can hear you. Dr. Salva, thank you very much for raising your hand. You have the space to ask your question or to add your comments if you want.
Yes, thank you. I ask you, distant learning can be easily applied on general education, but technical education that be so hard because it's practical.
Yeah, of course, there are some limitations. I think, if I'm not wrong, there is going to be interesting presentation after which will mention the case of technical education also applied through distance learning. There's a manual component which you will never be able to actually replace. So even when you have distance education, there's part of the work that has to be done in school or in companies. But what is usually done is to have a blended form of learning. So where whatever you can implement through distance learning, you do, and then you have some hands-on session, practical training in specific environments. And this is a way of ensuring effectiveness in education, because then you need a much more limited number of schools and practical workshops, because big part of it is done distance education. But indeed, for many vocations, there's no way you can avoid the manual training.
Okay, Filippo, thank you very much. Let's do this. Let's move on with the poll. Otherwise, there's not going to be time for other questions to the other speakers. So I see there's a lot of raised hands, but please be patient and we will answer later on if you want. Thank you very much. So again, you see on your screen the Slido platform with the QR code that you can scan, so we can move on to the poll. So there's a question that I would like Filippo to comment on the results. I'm going to show it just now. So yes, Filippo, go on with the question, please. Thank you.
So, I mean, I've presented a number of pillars of digitalization in education, and the idea I wanted to ask you, for you, what is going to be the biggest challenge in the process of bringing forward this type of reforms? So if you see these different elements, which is the one that you think is going to be more complex for ministries and for governments, for schools, for families, and which should be, of course, the priority to be addressed? I'm not surprised by teachers' competences. As I said before, you can invest a lot in training, but you need to be aware that you might need to wait for some years before you really have, at systemic level, a coherent mass of teachers who can introduce digitalization in education. This is not sufficient, and that's why the standards are important. You cannot just say that teacher has participated into the training, which means that now he can actually do it. This is not the case. I mean, it should be outcome-based. You need to check, assess the teachers, and really be aware that he is capable or not. The pedagogy is linked to that. I mean, the fact that you really need to understand how you can implement the pedagogy. And this is both from teachers, students, and families, as I mentioned before. For the rest, is more or less slightly a bit more in terms of equity and social inclusion as a challenge compared to the other ones. I think the creation of digital content, everybody is more or less confident that you can find enough stuff on the internet, or that you can easily produce it. So I think really is for the teachers is the main issue. I mean, talking about a forum which is made of center of excellence, I think the participants are quite well aware of what could be the challenges in the school. So I think this is a very significant answer.
Okay, Filippo, I see there's really a lot of questions for you, and addressing the topic. We need to, yes, please.
I would say that it could be that part of the answers will come from the next two presentations. So we could have the presentations and then introduce the questions to the next session of question and answer. And in any case, I can reply, let's say, offline to all questions which you don't manage to reply, and send to you, so you can share the answers to the participants later. Those we do not manage to cover live.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, Filippo. Thank you very much. I would just move on to the next speaker, We have the pleasure today to have Luis de la Torre Cubillo, who is the founder of Unilabs, and he's going to show us today a simulation of the Unilabs. Luis, are you connected with us?
Yes, I am. I hope you can hear me.
We can see you and hear you, yes.
Great.
The floor is yours, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen instead of using this one.
Okay, go on.
Okay. There it goes. So I hope you can see my presentation now.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So yeah, thank you for the introduction, Valentina, and also thank you to all the Skillman people and staff who invited me to give a talk here. It's a pleasure for me. So I'm going to talk about Unilabs, which is a network of remote laboratories based on IoT technologies. Unilabs stands for University Network of, I think I can minimize this. Yeah, that should be better. It stands for University Network of Interactive Laboratories. The previous presenter already talked about the importance of making learning interactive in digital and distance context. So this is what this presentation is about. And it is focused particularly on technical and STEM education. So that is also related to the question that Dr. Salva made before. So this is the index I'm going to follow in the presentation, just 3 points. First, I'm going to present the problem, and then I will introduce the conceptual solution that we are using for several years now with Unilabs, and then I will move and make a short live demonstration on some of the remote and online laboratories that we use in this network. So of course, the problem is well known, and it was already stated by Dr. Salva, as I said, and it all comes from the fact that STEM and technical subjects require hands-on experimentation, right? I think this is something that we can all agree on. Nobody's going to reply here, I guess. But what happens when you have a context in which your students cannot perform hands-on experimentation? For example, the situation we have already with COVID situation and so on. There are other situations, of course. For example, my university, which is a distance education university, faces this problem every day since it was founded like 32 years ago. So we are a university that is focused on online and blended learning. And there are, of course, more and more universities going to this educational model nowadays. Since several years now, there are more and more universities that are appearing or moving their learning process to a blended model. Moreover, in my university and in other distance education universities like the Open University in the UK and others, not only the students perform at least part of the learning process at distance, but they are also geographically scattered. So for example, in UNED, we have students all over the country, all over Spain, but we even have students in South America, in many of the capitals in Europe, in London, in Berlin, and so on. So of course, you need to wonder how can you enable these students to perform technical education and STEM education with laboratory practices to feel that very important part in these subjects. There is even more problems there. In our university, again, students usually have jobs because they are adults already, and they also usually have family, and they have family obligations. So these two things also make it very difficult to, get our students to do the laboratory practices in a very fixed schedule in a particular location, because they have a lot of restrictions in their agendas. So these are all things that you need to have in consideration. And then on top of that, of course, is the current situation with COVID, in which you cannot just gather 30 people in the laboratory to make laboratory practices in the traditional hands-on way. But let's forget about all these problems and let's just think on an ideal world in which when a teacher says, I want all of you tomorrow at 8 a.m. in the laboratory to make the laboratory practices, and every single student is able to go to the laboratory. Even in this ideal world, in this case, I think there are problems that we can solve or fix, at least partially, to make the learning process in technical and STEM practical education smoother and better. So this is a narrative, this is an imaginary situation, but it is quite common it happens quite often. When I was a student like 12 years ago in the university, or 13 years ago, this happened all the time, either to me or to some of my colleagues. So here we have two imaginary students, Amanda and John, and they are in the laboratory practice in the lab room. So Amanda says, hey, John, we are lab partners today. Let's start. Have you read the lab practice today? And the first problem comes here when John says, oh, I totally forgot. But well, okay, Amanda says, that's okay, I did it because, girls are usually more active in these kind of things that we boys are. And she says, let's see, where the hell is the power button on for this thing? And John says, wait, I'll call the teacher. So this is a second problem they are facing. First one is they did not come well prepared enough to the lab. And the second one is they faced some problem when using the laboratory equipment because they couldn't find a button or connect the wires or whatever. And they have to wait for the teacher to answer the doubt they have on how to proceed with the experimentation. And Amanda says, yes, I'm afraid he's busy with other students. So John says, yeah, well, let's wait. So, the clock ticks and the time goes by. And finally, the teacher is free because he has already answered to the questions to the other students in the lab. And he goes to Amanda and to John and says, okay, guys, so haven't you started yet? And John says, well, we managed to turn this thing on and to connect the wires, but now we have a doubt. And Amanda says, yeah, we do not know how we are supposed to measure this thing, whatever they are doing. And the teacher says, well, that's too bad. You only have, 1 hour and a half for this lab session, and it's been 20 minutes already since we have started. And John says, damn, can we stay longer to make sure we have time to finish the experiment, please? And the teachers, of course, says, I'm afraid not. I have to give a lecture after this lab session because, teachers are, we are usually quite busy and we also have our schedule. And Amanda whispers to John, I wish we could have more lab time. And I think this is a very important part of what I'm going to present. The online laboratories are not meant to substitute hands-on traditional laboratories, but to complement them. And one of the most important things that they offer to the students is that they give them much more laboratory time to get all the data, all recordings, whatever they need, familiarize with the experiment, and so on. So what's the conceptual solution? What is this whole idea of online remote labs and so on? Well, so if you are thinking on online education or blended education, of course, as it was mentioned before, this implies having some educational resources online. So you can have documents, PDFs, videos, you can have quizzes, a forum to make it more interactive and spark the debate and so on. But all these educational resources that you have are very good for general education. But if you have a STEM or technical education, then you also need to think on this part, on the laboratories, on practical education. So that's where online experimentation comes. So my point is, if you have online education in STEM or technical subjects, then you also have to enable some kind of online experimentation to make this online learning complete. So what's the idea on online experimentation? Well, hands-on experimentation is something that I guess all of you are familiarized with. You have the actor, in this case, the student that goes to the laboratory, to the room, and then through, manually or through a computer or whatever, but in the same place, he manipulates the laboratory equipment, and through the direct feedback, he receives or she receives the data and so on. Well, online experimentation is actually the same, but you get the student outside the laboratory. And in the middle, you have the network communication, so internet, and also the computer that student is going to use, or the tablet or whatever, and also some software in the middle in the lab, which is able to, talk to the information, the communication system through the internet, and the laboratory hardware. And also, of course, you need usually some cameras there to also provide some visual feedback to the student to make him feel a little bit more like in the lab, and give him some information about what's going on visually there in the laboratory. Right, so this is the architecture or the system we are using in Unilabs in UNED. So basically, we have the students which are able to access all these online learning experimentation resources through their computers or tablets, cell phones. Of course, cell phones are usually not a good platform to perform laboratory practices, because they are not very useful in these cases due to the touch and small screens and so on. But in any case, they can access the online course. This would be, for example, a Moodle course, or any other learning management system, in which you have all the learning resources, and in which teacher supervises the progress of the student and so on. And the difference is that now, instead of just having forum quizzes, PDFs, videos, and so on, you also have the laboratories. So laboratories could be either virtual or remote. We have both versions in Unilabs. Virtual laboratories are just simulations. They are based on mathematical models, so they are not real. And remote laboratories use real equipment in the lab. So in this case, when it is a remote lab, of course, you need the laboratory setup, and there is communication between this laboratory setup to the application in the online course, in the learning management system. And this is basically the structure of how Unilabs works. So what are the advantages of virtual and remote laboratories? Well, first is they are available in 24/7, or can be available in 24/7 if you maintain your remote laboratories correctly. So as I said, this provides students with more lab time, and they also make it easier to your students that may have family obligations, works, and so on, to organize their agenda and schedule their learning in a more flexible way. It also enhances accessibility for handicapped people, because it is sometimes not easy for some people to physically go to the lab and perform some operations in the laboratory. It also enhances observability, since laboratory sessions can be watched by many people, and they can also be recorded. And finally, online labs are more safe, of course. These labs are a better alternative than hands-on laboratories for some dangerous experimentations, such as those that operate high-power lasers, or radiation experiments and things like that. Right, so it is time to make a very short live demonstration, just to give you an idea on how this works. This is another schema on how Unilabs is working underneath. So this is more the technology that goes behind it, with some IoT technologies working there, and with an IoT platform that manages all the cyber physical systems that we use in the laboratories for the laboratory equipment and so on. Just a quick mention to say that it uses a system called Enlarge from a company I co-founded. So that's the technical part. But let's see a little bit of the feel and look, and how it works. So this is basically the web portal for Unilabs, in which several universities, Spanish universities, are involved and participating currently. And we have a catalog of laboratories here, so let's go through it very quickly. These are all examples on process control, on the process control area, because that's what my department is specialized at. But of course, we also have some online laboratories on physics, on optics, on mechanics, and so on, but they are not listed here. So as you can see, there are plenty of laboratories. In each of them, you can see the virtual laboratory, the simulation at the left, and the real remote laboratory version at the right. So that's why in the left, you always have a 3D representation or 2D representation of the system, because it is a simulation. And at the right, you always have the image from the camera in the laboratory to provide this visual feedback I previously talked about. So these are some of the examples in our catalog. So let's go to one of the courses. I'm going to enter this one. Here I am, and so you can see these systems we have seen in the catalog I just shown. They are listed here now inside the online course that our students use for this. So we have the ball and beam system, the ball and hoop, and so on. Each of these, let's say, practices or didactical units are divided or structured the same way. So for example, let's go to the Fruta pendulum system. So they have the documentation about the practice, a practice guide, a manual to tell them what the user interface for the virtual and the remote laboratory looks like and what each button does, and so on. And then the task protocol with the tasks they need to perform and the laboratory report they need to deliver to the teacher. So that's explained there. And then they have the access to the virtual lab or the remote lab. So the Fruta pendulum is a more advanced laboratory. I'm going to stick, because I'm running out of time, so I'm going to only show one of these two that I was thinking on showing. So I'm going to show the basic one, which is the Servo Motor. And again, as I said, the structure is the same, documentation, and then virtual lab and remote lab. So if I enter the virtual lab very quickly, then you will see that I have this simulation here and I can start working with it. So as I said, this is a process control system. I can change the input, click on play, and then the motor starts moving and I have my data there. I can change to an automatic control here and set a reference. So if I write 137, then the motor is moving to 137 degrees and should stop there when it reaches the equilibrium point I set here, right? So this is how students work with the application in the simulation. Again, remember, this is a simulation. Everything is based on a mathematical model, and that's what they have. But once they have worked with the theoretical model, then they can move to the real system. And that's another advantage of using both of them, because students first prepare with a virtual system, and once they are familiarized with the system and the process and what they have to do and so on, then they move to the real system. So they optimize and make the most of their time. So if I go to the remote laboratory now.
Luis, 1 minute left. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, that's perfect. So I connected to the remote lab. Actually, I am like 40 kilometers away from this laboratory right now. I am at home and I live at that distance from the laboratory approximately. So, okay, now I can choose to move the motor by entering a voltage input, and then the motor starts moving. I can change to automatic control like I did in the simulation, and then say, okay, I want my motor in 115, and then the control should, we're having some video delay right now in the camera because it started a little bit late, but at some point it will catch up and it should go to 115. So there you go. It is more or less at that point. And that's the kind of content and online laboratories that the students could use to support technical and STEM education in this kind of context. So that's all. The rest of the presentation is just the final slide to thank everybody for being here and listening to me, and just my email and a couple of links if you are interested in learning more about this.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you very much. If we are on time later, we will have we will collect some questions from the audience and try to answer them. Now I'm going to give this floor to Chris Richmond from Migrants right away, so we don't waste any time. And I really hope we will have some minutes to answer the questions. Chris, are you connected?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, everybody. Thank you for hosting me. I'm gonna share real quick my screen with you. My presentation will be a lot shorter compared to the others. I will answer to 5 specific questions that were asked to me. So the strength of migrants, how do we track the evolution of the training program? How do we personalize the training program for the trainees? How we validate the skills and the level of mastery, and the partnership that we have set with external partners. So before starting, I want to present myself. I'm Chris Richmond Z. I was born in Ivory Coast in '85. I had the privilege to be adopted when I was a kid. I grew up between Switzerland and United States, graduated international rights and diplomacy, and I worked for 5 years from 2010 to 2015 as a strategic analyst for a private agency of the European Commission. So I was just tracking the data to better understand the future trends of immigration flux towards the external borders of the EU. I resigned in 2015 to build Migrants, and as the brand says, Migrants is dedicated to immigrants in general in Europe and worldwide. So the first question, it's about who we are. So Migrants is a for-profit startup incorporated in Italy back in 2017, and we grew up a lot the last 3 years. And today the team is composed by 12 people. Let's say that 70% of the team is women, and 75% of the team is third country nationals, so not Italian citizens, but we are from everywhere in the world. Our strengths. Technically, Migrants is a web app, so no need to download an application from the store. You can access from mobile, from desktop, from tablet. And we deliver 3 specific services: information, training, and career placement for asylum seekers and status holders and immigrants in general. And we decided to use what we call micro-learning as methodology. So we deliver small bites of contents in 3 languages, and everything is based on model quizzes. So trainees can choose which kind of topic to take, and they have some simple quizzes. So they have a question, they read the question, they choose the option of answer they think is most correct one. If they got the correct answer, they collect a point. If they got a wrong answer, they receive a formative feedback to better understand that specific concept. Obviously, we track all the activities from all the trainees. So based on the data, trainees can track the evolution of their training program, and they can see how many modules they completed, average time to finish each single module, correct percentage of answers, and collected points. And obviously, when they achieve a level of mastery, they collect what we call open badge, and they can share the badge with third parties. But the best thing, according to me, that we succeed is the fact that all the data are necessary to build what we call the dynamic CV. So instead of working on self-assessment and ask to our trainees what kind of background, skills, or interests they have, we use the data and the evidence to generate a profile of skills, soft skills, hard skills, language evaluation, and the CV gets up to date every single time trainees take activities on the platform. So the CV that trainees had last week probably will be different from the CV that they have today, and the CV that they have today will be different from the CV that we have next week. So the whole process is fundamental in order to continue to use the data and to generate some data to track the evolution of the skills of our trainees. And we believe that the main problem between immigrants and service providers in general is the trust. So based on data and evidence, we want to increase the level of trust between our trainees and in general service providers, including private companies, corporates, and financial service providers such as bank, insurance, or householders. How do we track the evolution of the skills? As I was saying, everything is based on data. So this picture right here shows the data and the activity of 30 different trainees for the same module. So this is interesting according to me, because right here we see the performance, and we can really understand that some trainees show a high level of mastery. So they show already existing background, so consciousness, knowledge, or skills. But we also see some trainees that start with a low or practical zero level of skills or knowledge, but they have the desire and the ability to increase their performance during the time. So trainees can repeat each single module more than one time, and we can track the evolution. Obviously, there are also some forgiveness. So it is also interesting for us to understand when they start forgetting some concept and propose a topic or activity before they start forgetting some things. But here we also understand and see other attitudes such as motivation, perseverance, or dedication. Those are kind of information that are highly valuable according to us, but really hard to track and to measure and include in a CV. And using the data, it's easier for us to really track those kind of attitudes and to measure them and to use it for a social and career placement purpose. So this is the way we really understand the level of mastery of our trainees and also the proficiency. So the difference between the last attempt and the first attempt for a specific activity. Don't forget that we have more than 8,000 single module quizzes. That means more than 100,000 single questions. And those are the part of the data that we collect. And based on those data, we can really understand also the areas of strength, areas of weaknesses, interest. And those are fundamentals information that we need to, personalize the training program and also understand the most, let's say, prepare trainees according to the skills that is requested by the labor market shortage. So how do we personalize the training program? First of all, in the registration process, trainees can choose whether they want to get access to information, whether they want to get access to training program for career placement, or they want to get access to entrepreneurial contents. So if they choose placement, they can obviously also choose which kind of role they aspire to. And based on their selection, they will get access to specific contents on hard skills, soft skills, and language evaluation. And all the contents are based on the labor market shortage. So before creating and building the training program and the contents, we made a deep market research on the Italian and European labor market shortage to better understand which kind of industry, sectors, and roles private companies were asking. And we build the contents especially to fulfill that labor market shortage. But it's also true that trainees can switch from information to training to entrepreneurship when they want. They can switch languages. And obviously, we trying to evolve from micro-learning into adaptive micro-learning. So the platform updates the contents based on the quality of the training program and also on the decision taken by each single trainee. So even if two trainees take the same professional destination, they will probably have different contents based on the quality of their training program. So this is how we're trying to personalize the training program, giving also the opportunity to our trainees to get less effort in the term of time and get access to high quality contents everywhere they are. Another question is, how do we validate the level of skills? So I showed to you before the data that we have, but in this case, I want to show you what we call the assessment. For each content online and training program, we have several modules of quiz, and at the end of the training program, there is an assessment. So trainees can choose whether to skip all the contents, the training contents, and jump to the assessment and assess the level of mastery and the level of skills. In this case, the assessment is composed by 10 or more single questions, but trainees need to complete that specific activity within 5 minutes with at least 70% of correct answers. So here you have some examples about specific questions. you see the time that is running out. And obviously, if trainees complete successfully this kind of assessment, they achieve and collect their open badge. And the open badge can be shared, as I said before, with third parties. So, as I said before, we don't work on self-assessment, but we continue to work on continuous validation. And it's also true that if you don't complete successfully the assessment module, you can repeat just the same assessment module within 7 days. So you need to wait a week before taking the same activity. And during that time, you have the opportunity to go back on the training contents to empower yourself. Partnership that we don't really have a lot of partnership, but we have some partnership with, let's say, private companies, corporates. First of all, because they already know what kind of skills and profiles they're looking for. So we co-produce some specific contents with the corporates to really have, a better link and a fastest way to match already available skills on the platform and on the database with skills requested by the labor market shortage. But as you can see with Junior Achievement, we made some partnership to create some entrepreneurial contents and also entrepreneurial support. With team, we work to create some contents dedicated to the basic skills on digitalization, but we also have some other projects with Biostuff, UNICEF International, and Goodwill. And we also trying to seed in other markets. So with Goodwill, we're working in Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya to improve the quality of contents and delivering free of charge contents for every single potential and aspiring migrants. So we have the desire somehow to, innovate the Italian and European asylum system. And we also have, the ambition to create what we call intellectual corridors to give the opportunity to immigrants worldwide to move from their country of origin to a third country destination because of the skills that they possess and they own. So we want to match available skills with skills requested without any restriction, creating a legal framework and a safe framework where people can move freely as we do together and today with, let's say, the goods in general. So a lot of things happen in those 3 years, but we believe that we have another bigger challenge in front of us. And even if we are dedicated to support immigrants, especially, we also understand that technically this kind of process can be replicated also in other targets that are not immigrants, but could be needs or people need to be relocated somehow in the labor market shortage. So thank you, and I hope that everything was pretty clear, and I'll be available for further questions.
Thank you very much, Chris. Indeed, your presentation was very concise. Thank you very much for making it short. So we have time now to collect some questions and try to answer them. So especially because these both were very interesting examples. So I expect to have a lot of interaction at this point. It is time to raise our hands if we want to ask any questions at all. I see one question first from Maria Ribeiro in the chat box to you, Chris.
Yeah.
Have immigrants had success to find jobs after the training?
3 years later, as I said before, we have more than 90,000 active users per day online. We identify more than 11,000 high-skill profile, and we support 1,700 matching between talents and available career placement.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I see a raised hand, Mohammed Yadak. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and you can go on with your question. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. In fact, my question to the previous, Mr. Lewis, and about distance learning. No doubt that any approach has advantage and disadvantages. Of course, distance learning now we need it in this what we live in COVID-19. But at the same time, even technical education by virtual lab, as Lewis described his paper, will also be applied. But the question is, in my opinion, how to balance between the advantages and disadvantages in distance learning. Particularly, not only in technical education, also in general education, even it's more applicable than technical education. But in fact, we have to be balanced in this approach. Many things we will, the students lost, for example, the social will be lost. You know, the individual differences between students, they're not, in this case, they're not addressed. You know, some people learn by work. Some people learn by touch. So distance learning, we have to be conservative. That's my, in fact, opinion about this. We not go it as it, but in like this conditions that we live now, well, it will be okay. But generally, I think we have to rethink about distance learning. Even it's, of course, no doubt that has much advantages, but at the same time, we have to balance it.
Thank you very much, sir. Filippo, do you want to comment on what he just said about distance learning, please? We cannot hear you now. Still cannot hear you? Okay, now yes.
Okay. Distance learning has been studied for many years, so there are many researches about it, and there's more or less a consensus that it's blended learning that really brings the added value. In general, there's a very important element of socialization in learning that it's of course crucial when kids are small or even where they are at secondary, but even when it's talking about adults, this is a very important component you cannot keep completely away. However, to link to these and linked also to the presentations, I have to say that adult learning and continuing education is a very easy environment where to start, because it actually fixes many of the challenges. Like if you're actually paying for upgrading your skills, you're going to participate. You don't need justification or particular strong motivation because you enroll because you want to get an additional diploma. And you do have stronger skills and personality that allow you to interact online in a more natural way than a 15 years old. So if a country wants to experiment, or if a school or central excellence want to start implementing distance learning, definitely continuing education is an easier environment.
Okay, thank you, Filippo, for your comments and answer. I will just take the very last question to Chris.
May I say something? Valentina.
Yes, what, sorry, Giovanni?
I would like to say something because I was initially a little bit disoriented about the connection among the three presentations. When you, Chris, started to present your work, your solution, then boom, the connection came great. And I thank you very much, all of you, the three presentations. What I have got in mind after all these three, and I have a question for you, Chris. It's like if you reflect on the movie Matrix, the persons that were conducting not real life, but implementing real skills. And then if you remember that you could be able to charge your skills like Amazon Alexa call the skills, the capacity of the computer to realize activities. So in a way totally digitalized, your skills maybe could overlap with the knowledges. I don't know the future, but it's just an idea I got in mind. So the question, Chris, is what is your definition of skills? Because you talk about acquisition of skills that are also assessed by data, evidences, but these evidences, I think, I don't know, are connected to the input that the users put in your system that are more linked to the knowledges and not to the problem we have that also Hamad was mentioning, the capacity to do something, the psychomotricity and the involvement of the physical environment that you need. So we started to discuss how to learn at distance, but then we are reflecting on how will be the future where maybe the distance will be the normal way to live and to interact with the machineries and everything. So it will be a knowledge and a know-how and a competence concrete on something, or it will be just a knowledge to drive all that is around us in the real world, and that will be, I don't know. So the question is for you, Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe there is a huge difference between knowledge and skills. And I also believe that we need to work on both sides. It's also true that through migrants, we start delivering knowledge and simple concept to increase the level of knowledge. And we also turn from theory into practice using some real life experiments and also some simulation. And we can also use some different type of quizzes to check the ability of someone to be able to use things and to process some activities. So it's also true that we can better understand if the user can put in line and order a specific process to do something. And this kind of process is based on the previous experience, formal or informal experience, but also on the ability to do things and not on the knowledge. So there is a difference between, according to us, the knowledge and the skills. And yes, we have worked and we continue to work on the several methodologies to really put the trainees in a practical situation and see how we behave. So there is also behavioral situational judgment and assessment that we use, and other tools and methodology that can be helpful to divide knowledge and skills. But as you said before, it's also hard, really, and it's also important to implement both theoretical part and the practical part. So for some specific roles, it is important to have, according to me, today in 2020, a physical experience. But we try somehow to, decrease and reduce the gap between those who have the opportunity to move and go somewhere to, have a life experience, and immigrants that somehow are, live in a physical place, in an accommodation center, and they have no chance somehow to move and get access to, lifelong learning. So we're trying to give them the opportunity to get access to knowledge and skills, but essentially to somehow track their level of background, formal and informal background. So knowledge and also existing skills.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think the time has come to close this session. Thank you very much for attending the session to everyone. I see in the chat box that everybody's thanking Chris Richmond and Luis de la Torre for their outstanding presentations. Thank you, Filippo, very, very much for the organization of this webinar. I will leave you with the final remarks before we get split into the breakout rooms. I'm just going to briefly explain that now we're going to be redirected automatically to some breakout rooms. Those are going to be parallel sessions of different webinars and different sessions. So the first three are going to be one for Iveta, one for the Assembly of European Regions, and one for April. And these 3 rooms are going to have different activities happening within the room. Then we're going to have some in-depth workshops. And finally, we're going to have one room for transnational mobility and learning pavilion. Before getting split into these 3 rooms, Filippo, please, for the final remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I already made some general remarks from my presentation. I think the 2 examples were very interesting. They actually identified very strong added value of digital technologies and digital teaching and learning into different environments. They both focused on adults, which I think led to my conclusion that it's a very safe place where to start. You need a lot of flexibility. You need to really see what's the impact of what you're doing, because it has a component of a social exclusion that you have to take care. And you need to understand how much your teachers are able to work on it. I mean, it's a very complex exercise, but it has a long-term added value, which is very strong. So it's very important that at different levels, schools, center of excellence, ministries, depending on the degree of autonomy, they do experiment and they do start. The most important thing for me is really the digital competency as a key competence, because that's the easiest way to assess how are you performing with digital technologies. So this is, for me, is the last key point. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Filippo. So I see that there's a great turnout at this time. We're 109 participants. So as I was mentioning before, now we are entering the breakout rooms. So they're going to be like separate simultaneous and parallel sessions. So just to give a general instructions to what is going to happen now, you will be redirected to the rooms just in 2 minutes. So there's you just keep on the main room, and someone from our internal team will automatically open the rooms, and you will be landed into your room. The room of preference was asked to you by email in the past days. So according to your preferences, you're going to be redirected to one of those rooms. If you haven't expressed any preferences, don't worry, because once the rooms are open, you will be able to choose the room or switch from one room to the other at any time. So again, I'm going to show you the sessions that we're going to have now, starting from 3:30, so in 2 minutes. One first room will be dedicated to IVETA. The second room will be for AER, the Assembly of European Regions. Then we're going to have one session in the April pavilion. Then we're going to have some in-depth workshops happening in another room. And lastly, we're going to have a transnational mobility and learning pavilion in a separate pavilion. So these are all separate pavilions that are going to take place in just about 1 minute. So feel free to go to attend the pavilion that you're most interested in. All the pavilions will be coordinated by some representatives of those organizations. So do not worry about anything, just stay in this room and you will be redirected automatically. For any issues or anything, please contact us. Someone will stay in this room. So do not worry about that. Everything is being coordinated. Thank you very much.